Hello, and welcome to yet another episode of the Back to the TARDIS podcast, the podcast where we take a look at every single episode of the 2005 revival of BBC's Doctor Who. I'm Geoff.
I am Aurora.
And I'm Kanaya.
And this week, we are discussing Series 10, Episode 2, Smile, by Frank Cottrell Boyce. Now, Frank Cottrell Boyce happens to be the person who wrote a little episode called In the Forest of the Night. And I'm very happy to report that this episode, like In the Forest of the Night, is also good, but unlike In the Forest of the Night, is actually sober, somewhat, and not just complete crackheadedness.
Yeah.
No, go, if you have anything.
No, just this was
okay.
This was a really solid episode. That's kind of like a formula of like, okay, we were going to a place, stuff isn't as it should be, like it's deserted, and we got to figure out why. It's very like boilerplate, like template Doctor Who, but it does that well, and I'm glad we're here right now.
Yeah, I was just saying right before this that it's very much just like, you know, we say this a few times, but like it's just a good episode of Doctor Who, and it's just it doesn't do anything like very particularly like exceptional for Doctor Who, but it's just a very, you know, compelling, rather, like Aurora said, this is a common setup for Doctor Who episodes. They're in a place and things are spooky, but it's well executed, and it's just a solid addition to that repertoire of episodes.
And I think it does manage to feel a little bit it manages to still feel somewhat fresh and unique because the presence of Bill adds a new dimension to it, because Bill is a companion but tends to approach a lot of situations from a perspective that not necessarily a lot of other companions come from. Like, she's always asking questions, and the questions that she's asking feel a bit more unique than the usual boilerplate stuff. And two, the visual presentation of this episode is really good because they went to a fucking like big ass museum campus in Spain that I believe was also used as a filming location in like Westworld and shit, and that adds like a really special flair. It looks a little bit better than your average Doctor Who episode because it manages to have this fantastical location and actually shoot on location instead of on set with CG elements or other budgetary restrictions.
That's really shocking to me. I didn't know this was shot on location. That's really impressive because it I don't know, it looks very fantastical, as you said. I had thought it was CG, but that's impressive that they managed to find a location for that. And I think it does look very, very good. You know, this is an episode whose visual style I remember a lot. It reminds me of, what's the episode where they're in the two rooms, the like disease care one with
The Girl Who Waited?
Yes. It reminds me a lot of that sort of aesthetic. Except,
but if it had a budget, because The Girl Who Waited is ultra budget.
Yes.
Yeah.
It looks like a much smoother version of that, and with a more, refined aesthetic. And it's one I very much appreciate. Definitely visually, this is a very solid episode.
Mm-hmm. And to jump off of what you were saying, Geoff, with how Bill enhances this like kind of like basic in concept episode with like her character, it kind of dawned on me that it's been a while since the Doctor has been like drawn to a companion just because they're like curious or they like stand out off the bat. With Clara, it was obviously a plot thing. With Amy, let's not talk about that because we've relitigated that enough. Like, it's just the last one I can really think of is Martha, and even though I love Martha, I do. She holds a special place in my heart. She deserved better, though, because while they kind of start off very similar, of like they're asking like these right questions and they're behaving in these stressful situations in ways that like a lot of other people wouldn't. With Martha, it's like it very quickly goes down to like romantic path and
Yeah.
the pining.
The briar patch.
Yeah. The clusterfuck, and here Bill bypasses all of that by being gay based.
Based.
Yeah. So it's just like you don't have to deal with that. We can keep exploring like her as her own like separate person reacting to all these things, and she's not like in the doctor's pocket in the same way that like a lot of RTD era was, except for Donna. Like it's just we
Yeah.
just went straight there. It's nice.
Yeah. And somehow, despite being the episode with the emoji robots, it's not embarrassingly boomer. In
Yeah,
fact,
I
like
feel as
the
though they treat it. I think he's a little wry about it, but he doesn't make too much of a point of it.
yeah. Well, and it feels almost more like a visual thing for marketing as opposed to like actually being the core concept, because when you get really down to it, the actual core concept of the episode is a life form of robots not properly understanding human emotion. Not and you can definitely make points of how the emoji stuff links back to that, but it does it in a very subtle way and doesn't really have anything to say about emojis or emoticons themselves.
Yeah, this episode kind of broke me when I realized that it was basically like a cousin of Inside Out, like thematically. Just like, hey, your emotions, like, just because you're not like happy, it doesn't mean like that these emotional processes going on aren't important. And if you build machines like with an algorithm or like with heuristics or whatever bullshit engineering terms, that it's just like this expression, this emoji means X, Y, and Z, and you tell them to like fix it if it's not this, like that's gonna go wrong. You're gonna have issues there. So it's like, again, there's like these small bits of complexity and intrigue in this overall very like basic story template. For a second outing in a series, it delivers.
And it
Yeah, and I
feels
think
very what I was just going to say is that it feels very it feels almost like classic sci-fi-esque in that approach, or I mean, I don't know for sure because again, I have limited experience, but it feels almost Star Trekian in its overall themes and approach.
I would say so. I feel like there's some track, maybe not like the way this plays out precisely, but just sort of the core concept of a robot race of this sort gone amok in this sort of way is very Star Trek.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um yeah. So yeah, and just it feels like this, you always have the introductory episode and then the episode after that where they go on like their first real proper adventure, and that always feels like your first trip forward and your first trip back, and that always feels like it's equally as important as the establishing episode, and sometimes that works better than others. End of the world, pretty solid. Shakespeare Code, we don't talk about. The Pompeii and Planet of the Ood, very good. But this really, I think, manages to accomplish an astonishing amount in 45 minutes. Like I was sitting through and getting to like the third act, like I'd say like the last 10 minutes, and I'm like, wow, this has only been like 35-40 minutes. It felt like longer in a good way.
Yeah, definitely. I think I felt similarly, just because I feel like they really delay the ultimate reveal of what exactly made them go wrong for a long while. Because
Yeah.
there's sort of that like end of the first act reveal, like, okay, they killed all the people, and then there's sort of a bit devoted to running away, and then they immediately come back, and then there's the whole part of them investigating the ship. And then like already, I think it's only about maybe 30 minutes in that they make the discovery that all the people are still on that ship, and then there's the whole them waking up. And so yeah, there really is a lot packed in there. And then you still have that, ultimate resolution, figuring out, or yeah, first they figure out why the robots went amok, and then they do that whole resolution thing. Anyways, what I'm saying is, yeah, there's a lot of back and forth in this episode, and they're running around a lot, and then just like continuously there's new elements being introduced to the story at regular intervals in a way that you don't really get those sort of mutations that far into the story as often as you do in this episode.
And it's just like Bill's just so great. Like just absolutely fantastic companion. Like she really feels like the heart and soul of this story, because like the doctor's just kind of around and being quiet and being like, I don't know what goes on, and she's the audience surrogate and the one kind of really discovering and reacting to a lot of these things. She's the one that finds the kid, etc. Yeah.
And I feel like throughout this episode there's this running, I don't know how to explain it. There's a hesitancy to her at first, and then a willingness to dive in with it, because she's very much like, Doctor, why are you the one who has to do this? Whereas more, I feel some of the other companions just sort of more dive in, or just willing to
Yeah.
take from the start that of course the Doctor is the one who has to like get involved and fix everything because he's this amazing man. Where she's a bit more critical of that. But then once she sort of accepts, like, okay, he's going to do this anyways, she's very much willing and capable of doing her role, a lot more so than perhaps some of the other companions were initially.
Yeah. And she gets to realize, like, and it makes this really great arc too of how she essentially, like, her first adventure was like all like she meets this person and she knows him across a length of time, but like her first proper adventure still is only like a minuscule look into who this person is, and she doesn't entirely kind of understand where the Doctor is coming from and how he acts with the various antagonistic forces of an episode until this episode, and kind of works through that as part of a major subplot of this episode.
Yeah, they take their time with that. A lot of episodes will give like lip service. They'll have a scene, which is still good, but I know from memory, I think at least, that like this continues into when they go into the past, and she sees that there's kind of like a darker side to the Doctor.
Yeah.
And that there's like real danger around him. And I'm sure we'll talk about that, but it's nice. I don't know, it's just nice to stay with a character that's like kind of still grounded in all of this. Cuz like all the other companions of this era, like Amy and Rory and Clara, eventually it gets so like normal to them that basically the only thing that distinguishes them from like how cool Nardole is that they're like not as smart and they like don't know the tech, but everything else they're like cool with. So it's like it's nice to return here.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I guess Nardole's in this episode for like 5 seconds at the very beginning.
And he eats.
It's kind of interesting.
He eats.
Because I feel like he had a bigger presence in this season, but he hasn't done much so far.
He does. He just doesn't have it until like more like monks and later.
Yes,
because the first time he's just kind of like, why are you flying about? You need to stay here and guard the vault.
Yeah, and I'm aware of that. It's just funny to watch these episodes and be like, oh, he doesn't actually do much here, does he?
Nope. He really doesn't. Yeah. I will say, like, it does kind of run into a problem where they get to the point where the humans pop out of the sleeping pods, and the doctor explains what's going to them, and I like the conclusion of this episode, but the immediate jump to, yeah, okay, I'm going to shoot up these fucking microbots with rifles is like just so they can have a conflict at the end is really dumb and nonsensical. Like, what the fuck are you gonna do with that? Really? They are literally the ground that you walk on. Are you fucking stupid?
Yeah, it's pretty silly.
Yeah, and at least it manages to like pretty quickly like it pretty quickly moves on past it and manages to like get to the actually good part where the doctor essentially like steps in and manages to reprogram this race and have the humans negotiate it with it, which is very based. But yeah, no, what was like the stuff leading up to it is just kind of silly.
Yeah, and I don't mind it that much because, as you said, it moves on pretty quickly. One thing I did think is a little odd is like he recognizes them as a fully fledged like intelligent species, and you'd think if he had recognized that, he would have some qualms against wiping their entire memory as a species. But whatever. Another interesting.
It's okay to kill the giant spiders with gas, but not with guns. It's okay to wipe their memory, but not shoot them with machine guns.
Another interesting bit of world building in this is that this seems to be the same ship as what's the episode called? The space whale episode.
What? The Christmas Carol? Really?
No, the space whale. The space whales with Amy and Rory.
Oh, Beast Below?
The Beast Below.
Yeah. Yes.
Did they say it was related to that or more because
I just get the impression because they mentioned that this was a ship that had evacuated from Earth, as was the case in the Beast Below.
Yeah, but in that case, that was more. In Beast Below, that was more like them evacuating the planet, but still sticking around because it was just solar flares, and I think the implication was that they would eventually return back to Earth once that had ended. Whereas this feels more like Earth has been destroyed and they have to move on to someplace completely different.
It's been Orphan 55, but
oh no!
I don't think they said specifically in the Beast Below that all the ships had stuck around. I think maybe just the British ship had. And I think because the Doctor explicitly says in this episode that he'd, quote, run into a few of the ships over the years. So I do think it's the same event.
Okay.
Yeah. It's at least lip service to canon that this type of conceit seems to happen a lot. Again, a very Star Trek thing to do, where it's just like, oh, we keep running into colonies that are the products of some descendants from this one colony ship we sent out and never heard from again. And sometimes they're like cool, and sometimes they're literal Nazis.
Yeah.
It happens. Yeah, it's a neat bit of like acknowledgement. Again, it's very much in keeping with the I guess the overall like mood or vibe of this series is that like you could literally like start Doctor Who here and you'd be like mostly cool for it. But there's obviously, enough respect feels too heavy, but there's enough recognition and like weight to everything that that there's like a lot that's come before this.
Yeah. Absolutely. But yeah, I do like the memory wipe is a little bit weird. But I do like that overall, like the message of this is that these beings are life forms too. And they deserve to have a place at the table, or in this case, well, okay, so on the one hand, the takeaway is that they are now the landlords of this place, which is slightly shooting itself in the foot, but I like what it's at least sort of going for.
Yeah, it's a little, oh god,
it's like you're trying.
It's like a band-aid to a shotgun wound.
I had a thought and I had a comment I considered making, and I was like, nobody who listens to this will know what the hell I'm talking about, so I just won't bother. But I think I will say it's just a little bit odd to like have them be an indigenous species and then have it be a landlording relationship. I don't know.
Yeah.
There wasn't much thought put into it. It's just analytically interesting.
A lot of the wires kind of get crossed at the very end, because it's like, at first there seems to be like this idea that like, no matter if you're just building a machine off of algorithms and heuristics, like no matter how complex the machine, if it's not like AI, it's not going to understand like the complexities of like human emotion and chemistry and like that type of bullshit. But then it's just like, oh no, this is a new species. And then it's like, well, okay, we still have some problems here. And it's not, I wouldn't say it's like an active negative for the episode, but it's kind of clear that it's like, okay, how do we wrap this up in a way that's like, I don't know, like semi-conscious of like the situation that they're left in. What I think is like the most, like the driving home part for me is like the fact that they kind of like linger on, we haven't talked about the kid at all. But like they kind of
he's
like
there.
Yeah. They linger. He's not the worst kid actor.
Yeah.
In that I again point to
worse.
Jackson
He's better
Lake's
than Jackson
kid.
Lake's son.
Yeah.
Yeah.
God. But it's just like the show kind of the episode kind of focuses on that like that trauma and that feeling of like the loss of a parent, and like that's really cool. And I think to me the episode would have been like at its peak had it stuck with that angle. And I know for like a, tying up the story reason, you have to figure out, okay, how are the emoji bots and the humans going to get along? Like, I get that you need to do that, but it was a small moment of like missed opportunity, at least on my part, that I felt with that. But like aside from that like small thing, like this episode is just like really good. It's a fun watch.
Yeah. No, it's so fucking good. It's just this, or like I think it falls off from what I remember. It falls off like a little bit as it gets on later into kind of like the back half, but this like the first half of this series is so good. um but yeah, it's so good that I don't really like, I don't have much to critically talk about. It's just like, it's good. It makes the chemicals in my brain be happy. It's a reminder of how consistently good Doctor Who can be when it's really firing on all cylinders.
Absolutely.
Um,
I think this is just, this is really just Moffat already in his stride and Capaldi knowing what he's doing. Um, yeah, they just, at this point in the show, they have a team that knows what they're doing, and I think they're just rolling along. And sadly, it got disrupted, but oh well.
yeah. Well, from what I understand, like at least this is what Emma filled us in on, is that like they actually, the BBC had them take uh take like a break, like they made them take a break for a year. um but I think that time off really did help. Like I feel like when they came back, they felt refreshed. um yeah. Anyways, um yeah, no, it's really solid. I like it a lot. Are we good to go on to ratings?
I'm good.
I'm fine with that.
All right. Yeah, this episode's just so solid and just feels super nice. I'm really glad that we finally, even if it's like a quiet before a storm of just absolute shit as soon as this season is done, I think it feels really nice and comforting to be back in some just real solid shit. It's an easy A plus.
Yeah. Um I've stopped caring about whether I'm doing letters or numbers.
Fair
Cuz
enough.
fuck you. But no, this was really good. Um really good, solid, classic formula for Doctor Who. Probably literally. I'm sure Classic Who has done a story like this. But it's with a new companion and Pearl Mackie. Um, one of the new Who goats, in my opinion. Just her character continues um to like deepen her relationship with the Doctor and what the Doctor's doing, and 12, of course. What haven't we said about Peter Capaldi? The location is great. The setup is great. It would be so easy to make the emojis like a cringe thing. In fact, when we first saw the trailer, we probably did, but like it's fine. It's all good, homie. Um, yeah, really, really excited to talk about next week. It's really good to be here. Just like wrapping this episode, wrapping myself in this episode like it's a warm blanket. It's nothing special, but it's like it's a really good vibe. What can I say? Um, this is a this is a strong fuck. I'll just
It's a
say
strong
I'll just say
episode. Very good.
it's a solid 9. Let's go with that. Fuck you. Solid 9.
All right.
Um, Yeah, I think this is just a really, all around solid episode. I think it does maybe lag a little bit at the end just because some of the ideas that they put forth to wrap it up are just a little bit silly and contrived, but I think it manages to stick the landing enough that it doesn't really detract from the episode. And the episode as a whole is just it's a very, it's a rather intricate plot, I'd say, but not altogether anything too exceptional. It's just very solidly done. It's very visually nice. The writing is very good and the acting is solid. And they just sort of make a neat little story come together, and there's a very interesting concept at the core of it, and I think it explores that concept very well in a meaningful way and has an interesting resolution to it. So I would say in the end it's maybe about an 8.5.
All right. Yeah. Anyways, uh yeah. Um next time we will be taking a look at Thin Ice. But until then, you can follow the podcast on Twitter at B2TARDISPod. You can support us on Patreon for a number of benefits, such as early access to episodes, the ability to listen in live to episodes during being recorded, and potentially even the ability to guest star in an episode of your choosing. I'm Jeff. You can follow me on Twitter at WhatelyDL.
I am the eggplant emoji, and you can follow us at Ahura Borealis on Twitter.com.
You can unfortunately not follow us on Twitter.com because we are once again banned.
Oof.
Oh my god.
Jack has it out for you. I don't know what to say. And we will see you all next week.